journalist and author Michael Jansen launches her new book inspired by the 2011 Egyptian Revolution.
They were peaceful, they were attacked by the government. 846 people were killed, and they stood their ground. Sometimes they had to fight back, but they were welcoming and friendly, and it was a great experience.
On Wednesday evening at the CVAR in Old Nicosia, there was a book launch. The book, Windows on Interesting Times, is by Michael Jansen, and she joins us now. Michael, I have to start by asking about your name, because it's most unusual to have a lady called Michael and not Michaela or something.
Well, my parents had different excuses for giving me this name. It all wound down eventually to the fact that my mother had a favorite film actress who was married to John Barrymore and who took the name of Michael Strange. And so I ended up with the name Michael.
Has it been difficult through your life, that?
It has been, on occasion, quite difficult. Actually, I wrote for the Irish Times for a certain number of months, and everybody thought I was a man.
Let's talk about your work as a journalist first before we get onto the book, because I suspect that the window on interesting times is very much due to the life you've led, mostly in the Middle East, I think, and now in Cyprus, and seen a lot of, well, very different things going on. So tell us a little bit about your journalistic career.
Well, I studied politics, actually, at university, and then as an undergraduate, then I went to the American University of Beirut and studied more politics, and I also worked in Beirut, and I edited books and edited a journal, and then I did some journalism off and on, rather freelance kind of journalism. I also wrote regularly for something called Middle East International, which was published in London. And in 1987, I joined the Irish Times as a Middle East analyst and have been going at it ever since. And also, my husband was a journalist, so it was in the family. And he used to write for The Economist of London. And he also wrote for an Indian paper. And then I also do columns for the Jordan Times and the paper in the United Arab Emirates called The Gulf Today.
So you've got a lot of experience in Middle East politics, and living there must have also given you a slightly different take on things, because it's quite difficult to really grasp what people are feeling if you're not among them, isn't it?
Well, the point is, my view of what a journalist should do is to report events as straightforwardly as possible, and to speak to the people to see what their views are, and not impose my views. Now, of course, I do opinion stuff as well, but I don't try to put my opinions in my reporting. So my aim has always been to tell the story the way the people themselves saw it. And I lived in Beirut for 14 years, and I've lived in Cyprus for 42 years.
So you've written also about the Cyprus issue?
Yes, I've written a novel called The Aphrodite Plot, and I wrote a book about the theft of antiquities following the Turkish invasion called War and Cultural Heritage.
And you wrote The Battle for Beirut?
And I wrote The Battle for Beirut, which was about the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982. And I wrote a book about the Israeli peace movement, which was called Dissonance in Zion, which was published in London.
So you've got a lot of experience in this area. Now let's move to the book that was launched earlier this week, Windows on Interesting Times. You've probably had so many interesting times. I wonder how many windows you needed in the book to include the best ones.
Well, I didn't look for best ones. The book, well, it is called Windows on Interesting Times because the title comes from a Chinese curse called May You Live in Interesting Times. Now, as I say, the curse is what is important. And I tried to tell stories of the people of the Middle East and their events in the book. And I started out in Tahrir Square in Cairo in 2011 during the Egyptian Revolution. And I proceeded from there, but following my chain of thought. So the book is not a chronological exposition of what happened or a narrative. Everything is mixed up. But there are specific sort of headlines which stories are grouped under. But as I say, you will find a story from 1993 next to a story from 1967. It's all mixed up. But the point is, I have also done what journalists do when they send in their stories to newspapers. I put the date lines on, so you can identify where the stories are and the time that they are fixed into.
And some of them presumably have nothing to do with some of the others. So
yes, I mean, they do, to try to tell the story of the Middle East with all the different problems that it has and all the different countries would be almost impossible.
Be a very long book,
Yeah,
too.
it would be this could be a much longer book because I have a lot more stories. But the whole idea is to give an impression. It's an impressionist book. It's not a history. It's not a biography. It is an impressionist book.
So you have used journalistic tricks in a way, but you're putting them in with your opinion.
No, I tried not to put any opinion in. In this book, I have stayed away from opinion. I have just tried to describe the events and tell what the people think. When I write opinion pieces for newspapers, that's a different story.
Okay, but books are also a different story, aren't they?
Yes, books are a different story.
I mean, they're a narrative very often, and this must be a narrative.
It is a narrative, but everything is all mixed up.
You must have so much material. Are you preparing another book?
No. When I wrote the last one, I said, that's it. And then I wrote this one.
Oh, well, there you are. So you probably will write another one. What is it that actually pushes you to,
Well,
in a sense, you can't say pick up the pen anymore. I presume it's all done on a
on
computer.
a
But in effect, pick up the pen and say, oh, yes, I need to do that one.
Well, this one, I think it was mandated by my experience in Tahrir Square, which was one of the greatest experiences I've had so far in this part of the world. Because you had Egyptians from all walks of life, all backgrounds, all incomes in this square, all pushing for the removal of the president who had been there for 30 years and demanding bread, freedom, and justice. And they were peaceful, they were attacked by the government. 846 people were killed, and they stood their ground. Sometimes they had to fight back, but they were welcoming and friendly, and it was a great experience. And any journalist who had been in Tahrir Square during those days in January 2011, February 2011, was most impressed with the people. The eldest person in the square was 97. She was nearly blind and deaf, and I had met her in my first trip to the Middle East in 1961. And I interviewed her 2 years later and got her whole story, which was fantastic. I mean, these are the kind of stories I've been trying to tell in the book, the stories of the people. I mean, she was the daughter of a pasha who was under the British rule, and he was also in charge of public works. And when she was a young girl, he had refused to let her go to university. He wanted her to get married and have children. She refused to get married. She never did. After he had died, she had gone to university, got her MA, but she made a life for herself working with a charity which looked after children with tuberculosis.
Fantastic stories. And you're still travelling? Are you going back to any of these places in the coming months?
I just came from Jordan a few days ago. So I still travel. I've been to Syria this year. I try to go to Syria 2-3 times a year. So I've only been once, so I have to try to go again.
And we have to talk about some of those trips another time. Michael, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Good luck with Windows on Interesting Times, which was launched this week in Nicosia at the CVAR. If you'd like a copy, Google it, look for it online, or go along to Solonian Bookshop in Nicosia or contact Rimal Publishers in Limassol.